Welcome to your SI joints. So what you're looking at here is you are looking at a pelvis. This piece here is your sacrum. This is your innominate, also known as your hip bone, and the innominate is an anatomical term for the hip bone because it means bone with no name. And the reason why it's bone with no name is it's actually three bones that have been fused together. We have the ilium, we have the ischium, and then we have the pubis on the anterior side of the pelvis. And so where the ilium meets the sacrum is the sacroiliac joint. And so you can see the connection point here and here. And if I flip this guy around, this is a pelvic floor type of pelvis. But here you've got the joints in here. Here you see them, the top part here, and they go all the way down and all the way down, right? So lots of issues can happen in and around these SI joints. If you look around here, here's the acetabulum, and that's where the femur sits in and makes that hip joint. And what's interesting is that the amount of movement in the SI joint and on both of them is very, very small. In fact, for a long time, it was believed that these joints did not move at all. And then the osteopathic and chiropractic world sort of spun that on its head and said that they actually do move. And then research has shown that the movement is anywhere between 3 and 10 degrees, depending on your age and depending on just the state of your structure. Typically, the SI joints get a little bit more calcified and fused as we get older, which is sort of a curious thing. And of course, as we know, with pregnancy, there's a little more lax in the ligaments, and that causes things to move better because we actually do want these to move better come time for a baby to be delivered. Now, what's interesting is that the movement is primarily nutation, with this part of the pelvis nodding forward and then the bottom part of the pelvis nodding backward for counter nutation. And if you think about if the head of this was going to nod forward, that would close the top part of this down and open the bottom part, and counter nutation would close this bottom part and open this top part. And so you can kind of get a feel for how that would be helpful in delivery. Now, what's curious is really what the role of the SI joints are, and there has been lots of conversation and debate in the world of anatomy and biomechanics. What's the most curious is that men have SI joints too, so obviously their purpose is beyond just enabling a baby to come out of one's body. So I just plant that as a seed to sort of ponder. Now, when it comes to movement, because that's really where my expertise lies, in movement and helping people see movement and become aware of movement in their own selves, is when you take a look here at the acetabulum, and I want you to imagine the head of the femur, the thigh bone in here, the amount of movement, there's 6 ways that bone can move in the joint, and the movement's quite large, right? So it can go into flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, and 2 versions of rotation. And as I said earlier, the sacrum can only really move in nutation and counter nutation. Yeah, it can get stuck in other ranges, but really its pure movement is counter nutation and nutation, and really the amount of movement is so tiny. So a lot of times when people get really banged up here in these SI joints and they get a lot of pain in that area, it has more to do with what's not happening above and or below. So really, really straightforward, the sacrum connects into the 5th lumbar vertebrae on most people. Now I say most people because sometimes people will have their 5th lumbar vertebrae sacralized with the sacrum, or the first vertebrae of the sacrum might not be fully fused with the sacrum, so then they have an L6. But generally speaking, the top of the sacrum connects in with L lumbar 5, right? And then below here, they connect into these femur bones. And so if the pelvis, as it moves in all of its different directions, if it's limited in its movement, particularly through the femur bones and that joint, because there's so much range of motion in there that's available, if that gets limited, then the force has to move through the body in some way and in some form, but it's not, right? It's getting stuck and it's getting snagged and it's not being able to move or dissipate or be absorbed. So then what happens is trouble happens. And for some people, that trouble lands right here or in structures around here. And what needs to happen is, or what it feels like is SI joint pain, and that what needs to happen is perhaps an adjustment or a rebalancing of what's going on between the leg bones and the pelvis. Okay, so that's some food for thought right now about the SI joints and the leg bones for you to ponder. You might be wondering, well, now what do I do with that information? Well, if you take a peek at some of the videos that I've already shot around pure movement and the way bones are meant to move as we move into the various shapes of yoga, if you move your leg bone as purely as you can when you step back or step forward, you will find that you will gain more mobility and more stability, which will improve the motor control and coordination, which will improve the way the forces move through your body so that it won't get snagged and other parts of you don't have to go into compensation or into tension to try and keep you together. And you'll find that the pain in the SI joint starts to shift. So if there's questions more about that, please ask me. I will be addressing the SI joints more in June as we get into core stability, and then spending quite a bit of time in July as we to dig into them in related poses as well. Okay, but I'm happy to answer questions related to this clip. Okay, have a great time exploring. Take care. Bye-bye.